I used to genuinely believe my life was a meticulously crafted masterpiece. I had a fulfilling career as a structural engineer, designing the skeletal frameworks of ambitious skyscrapers that stretched toward the clouds. My days were filled with blueprints, calculations, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing complex visions take tangible form. At home, I had Eleanor, my wife of 8 blissful years. She was my anchor, my confidant, and the vibrant splash of color in my otherwise ordered existence. We were that couple, the ones whose laughter echoed a little louder at dinner parties, whose synchronicity in daily life seemed effortlessly perfect. I was Ethan, the devoted husband, and she, with her infectious enthusiasm and boundless charm, was my entire world. Friends, family, even distant acquaintances, would often remark on how fortunate we were to have found such a profound connection. And I, with every fiber of my being, believed them. Eleanor possessed a truly magnetic personality. She was a marketing director, a whirlwind of creative energy, and she could command a room with the sheer force of her smile. Her quick wit, always sharp but never cruel, made her the undeniable center of attention at any gathering. I adored that about her. She brought a spontaneity and vibrancy to my life that I hadn't realized I was missing until she arrived. Our lives were intricately woven together, shared hobbies, a close-knit circle of mutual friends, ambitious travel plans scribbled on a world map in our study, and the unspoken certainty of a future built hand in hand. We envisioned lazy Sunday mornings, eventual retirement by the sea, and the quiet joy of growing old together. I truly thought nothing could ever shake the foundation we had so carefully constructed. That's why, when Eleanor suggested we join her colleagues for a casual team-building night out at The Foundry, a trendy industrial chic bar downtown, I didn't hesitate. She'd recently joined a new department, and she was genuinely excited to introduce me to her new work friends, eager for me to see her thrive in this new environment. And I, as always, was eager to support her in any way I could. I remember carefully selecting my outfit, a comfortable but smart navy button-down shirt, dark wash jeans, and my favorite leather watch, the uniform of the effortlessly supportive husband. It was supposed to be a relaxed evening, a chance to unwind, share a few laughs, and perhaps meet some interesting new people. The Foundry was indeed lively, pulsating with a low hum of conversations and the clinking of glasses. The air was thick with the scent of craft beer and anticipation. Eleanor, with her usual grace, navigated us through the buzzing crowd, her hand lightly guiding my lower back. She spotted her group at a reclaimed wood table tucked away in a dimly lit corner. A wave and a bright smile from her, and we were welcomed into the fold. She introduced me to everyone with a flourish, her voice warm and proud. There was Sarah, a sharp-witted project manager, David, the quiet, analytical data scientist, and then there was Marcus. Marcus. His name, when Eleanor spoke it, seemed to hang in the air for just a beat too long. He was her new colleague, and something about him immediately put me on edge. He wasn't overtly offensive, but there was an unsettling quality to him. He was handsome, in a rugged, almost aggressive way, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that seemed to constantly assess. He was charming, certainly, but in that overly confident, almost predatory way that grated on my nerves. His smile seemed a little too slick, a little too practiced, and his laugh, when it came, was a little too loud, designed to capture attention. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize my discomfort. He's just charismatic, I told myself. Eleanor is my wife, and I trust her completely. I'd always prided myself on being secure in our relationship, on not being the jealous type. But an unfamiliar flicker of unease ignited within me, a tiny, unwelcome spark in the pit of my stomach. As the evening progressed, my attempts at rationalization began to crumble. I couldn't help but notice the subtle dance between Eleanor and Marcus. His attention gravitated toward her with an almost magnetic pull, a constant, low-level hum of focus. He leaned in conspiratorially when she spoke, his body language subtly closing the gap between them. He laughed a little too hard at her jokes, not just genuinely amused, but as if to underscore his appreciation of her wit, to set himself apart from the general polite chuckles. He seemed to find every conceivable excuse to engage her in conversation, their voices occasionally dropping into a murmur that excluded the rest of the table. I found myself observing them, my mind a whirl of internal conflict. Am I being paranoid? I chastised myself. Eleanor is just friendly, and Marcus is probably the same way with everyone. The bar's ambient noise, once a comforting backdrop, now seemed to amplify my growing anxiety. Then came the toast. It was Eleanor's idea, a sudden, impulsive suggestion. She stood up, her movements fluid and confident, raising her frosted glass of sparkling cider with a playful, almost mischievous smile. The clink of spoons on glasses rippled through our small gathering, and a hush fell over the table. To Ethan, she announced, her voice light and teasing, carrying just a hint of theatricality that I usually found endearing. The most predictable, safe husband a girl could ever ask for. A ripple of laughter, more awkward than genuine, spread through the group. It wasn't the boisterous, shared mirth of true amusement, but a hesitant, almost nervous chuckle. My stomach clenched, a cold knot forming deep within me. Her words, delivered with such an easy smile, stung more deeply than I expected. Predictable. Safe. The words echoed in my mind, stripping away layers of my self-perception, leaving me exposed. The laughter felt less like a shared moment and more like salt being poured into a fresh wound. Before I could even process the full weight of what she had said, before I could offer a forced smile or a witty retort to deflect the sudden sting, Eleanor continued. She turned her attention, almost imperceptibly, yet with undeniable intent, toward Marcus. Her eyes, usually so focused and warm when they met mine, now sparkling with a different kind of light as they landed on him. And to Marcus, she added, her voice dropping slightly, laced with a new warmth I hadn't heard before, for always keeping things interesting with his adventurous spirit. The room seemed to grow quiet, the last vestiges of polite laughter dying out entirely. The silence was palpable, thick with unspoken implications. A wave of raw, burning humiliation washed over me, a searing flush that crept up my neck and into my face. My jaw tightened, my hands clenching involuntarily beneath the table. I forced a tight, almost painful smile, a desperate attempt to project an image of unbothered composure, not wanting to make a scene, not wanting to confirm the sudden, sickening lurch of my stomach. Marcus, utterly unashamed, raised his glass with a cocky, knowing grin, clearly relishing the spotlight, the attention, and the implicit comparison. He met Eleanor's gaze for a beat longer than necessary, a silent communication passing between them that excluded me entirely. Eleanor, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shift she had just caused within me, sat back down beside me, her knee brushing mine. Her presence, once a source of comfort, now felt like a suffocating weight. I stayed quiet for the rest of the night, retreating into the fortress of my own thoughts. My mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. Was I overreacting? Was it truly just a harmless joke, poorly delivered? I desperately wanted to believe that. I wanted to cling to the image of Eleanor, my loving wife, who would never intentionally hurt me. But something about the toast, about the entire interaction, didn't sit right. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the casual dismissiveness in her tone when referring to me, juxtaposed with the genuine admiration in her voice when she praised Marcus. It was the way her eyes had skyrocketed, a vibrant, uninhibited joy, as she spoke of his adventurous spirit. It felt like a subtle, yet undeniable, public degradation. By the time we left the bar, the vibrant energy of the evening had curdled into a bitter cocktail of dread and suspicion within me. I was struggling to keep my emotions in check, my carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter. As we walked toward our car, the city lights blurring into streaks of color, the silence between us stretched taut, unbearable. Finally, I broke it. My voice, when it emerged, was rougher than I intended. That toast, Eleanor, what was that about? She looked at me, a flicker of surprise, almost feigned innocence, crossing her features. What do you mean, Ethan? You called me predictable and safe, I said, the words cutting through the night air, my voice betraying the raw hurt I felt. And then you praised Marcus for being adventurous. It felt disrespectful. Like a deliberate jab. She sighed, a dramatic exhalation, and brushed a stray strand of her dark hair back from her face, a gesture of exasperation I knew all too well. Ethan, it was a joke. You know I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a little light-hearted fun. But it didn't feel like a joke, I countered, my voice firm. Not to me. It felt like you were putting me down to elevate someone else. She stopped walking, turning to face me fully. Under the dim glow of a street lamp, her expression softened, morphing into a semblance of regret. I'm sorry if it came across that way, she said, her voice now a gentle murmur, practiced in its apology. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I love you, Ethan, you know that. I wanted to believe her. More than anything, I wanted to dismiss the gnawing doubt, to let it go, to embrace her apology and move on. The familiar comfort of our life, the stability I cherished, beckoned to me. But the unease lingered, a cold, persistent shadow. As we got into the car and the engine hummed to life, I couldn't help but notice how distracted she seemed, her eyes glued to her phone almost immediately. Her thumbs danced across the screen with a frantic energy. When I asked, as casually as I could manage, who she was texting, she waved it off with a quick, dismissive gesture. Just work stuff, you know, wrapping things up from the night. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, the comforting rhythm of her breathing a stark contrast to the chaotic clamor of my own thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The memory of the toast, Marcus's smug smirk, Eleanor's almost too quick dismissiveness, it all felt like disparate pieces of a puzzle I desperately didn't want to solve, a truth I instinctively recoiled from. I told myself I was overthinking, that my trust in Eleanor was unshakable, a bedrock of our relationship. But deep down, in the quiet, vulnerable corners of my mind, a small, insidious voice whispered that things might not be as perfect as they seemed. The carefully constructed masterpiece of my life felt precariously balanced, teetering on the brink of an unknown precipice. The car ride home that night felt endless, an agonizing stretch of asphalt soaked in an uncomfortable, pregnant silence. Eleanor stared out the window, her phone clutched in her lap like a lifeline. The city lights blurred past, but her gaze seemed fixed on some distant, internal landscape. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, trying to focus on the road ahead, on the mundane act of driving, but my mind was a maelstrom. Her toast, those searing words, predictable, safe, replayed in my head on an endless loop, each repetition a fresh stab. And then the image of Marcus's face when she called him adventurous, that smug, knowing grin, the kind that made every fiber of my being want to wipe it off with one good, solid punch, it was branded into my memory. I couldn't take the silence anymore. My voice was tight, strained. So, what exactly was going on with Marcus tonight? Eleanor turned her head slightly, her expression carefully neutral, almost practiced. What do you mean, Ethan? My grip on the steering wheel tightened, the leather groaning under the pressure. You two seemed incredibly close. He was practically glued to your side. You were laughing at all his jokes, sharing these inside jokes I've never heard before, constantly murmuring to each other. She sighed, a dramatic, weary exhalation, and rolled her eyes in that way she always did when she thought I was being unreasonable, overly sensitive. Ethan, honestly, he's just a coworker. We spend a lot of time together at work, collaborating on projects. That's all there is to it. I wanted to let it go. God, how I wanted to believe her, to retreat into the comfortable delusion of our perfect life. But something about the way she said it, the dismissive wave of her hand, felt like she was swatting away my legitimate concerns rather than addressing them with any genuine empathy. It didn't look like just work, Eleanor. And that toast. It felt like a direct comparison, and I came out on the losing end. She let out a short, forced laugh, devoid of any genuine mirth. Oh, for heaven's sake, Ethan. It was a joke. You're completely overthinking this. Am I? I shot back, my voice rising slightly, glancing at her briefly before forcing my gaze back to the swirling lines of highway. Because it didn't feel like a joke. It felt incredibly disrespectful. Like you were humiliating me in front of your new colleagues. Her forced smile evaporated, and she crossed her arms, leaning back against the passenger seat, a visible wall erecting between us. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just trying to lighten the mood, make everyone comfortable. If it upset you, I'm truly sorry. But I honestly think you're making this a much bigger deal than it needs to be. I didn't respond. What was the point? She was clearly unwilling to see my perspective, to acknowledge the sting of her words. And I, in turn, was too emotionally raw for a protracted argument. The rest of the drive was filled only with the monotonous hum of the engine and the maddening, intermittent buzz of her phone. Each time it vibrated, she would snatch it up with an almost alarming speed, her thumbs flying across the screen before she quickly set it face down again, as if hiding a secret. I told myself it was work-related, that she was probably just wrapping up urgent emails or coordinating something important for the next day. But my gut, a primal, insistent voice, screamed otherwise. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the familiar silhouette of our house, usually a comforting sight, now loomed like a silent accuser. Eleanor wasted no time, heading straight to the bedroom, claiming she was absolutely exhausted and needed to collapse. I lingered in the living room, collapsing onto the plush couch, numbly flipping through channels on the television. The mindless chatter of late-night sitcoms was drowned out by the relentless, amplified roar of my own thoughts. I hated how insecure I felt, how a single evening had managed to erode the bedrock of my trust. This wasn't me. I had always been confident in our bond, trusted Eleanor implicitly, never once doubting her loyalty or her love. But tonight, something profoundly unsettling had shifted. The image of Marcus hovering around her, the way she seemed so utterly comfortable, so alive, in the glow of his attention, it felt like I had stumbled upon a scene I was never meant to witness, a private play unfolding right before my eyes. I tried, desperately, to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I am overreacting, I reasoned. Maybe the toast really was just a poorly executed joke, and Marcus is just another annoyingly charming coworker. I tried to convince myself to simply let it go, to embrace her apology and move on, to trust her as I always had, to bury the thorny seed of doubt. The next morning, I woke to the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the cheerful sound of Eleanor humming in the kitchen. She was a picture of morning normalcy, bright and bubbly, as if the tumultuous undercurrents of the previous night had simply vanished with the dawn. I watched her from the doorway, a knot of bewilderment and pain tightening in my chest. How could she act so utterly normal, so carefree, when I felt like the ground beneath my feet had begun to crack and crumble? "Good morning, sleepyhead," she chirped brightly when she noticed me, her smile wide and genuine. "I made your favorite, scrambled eggs with crispy bacon." I forced a weak smile, the effort feeling monumental, and sat down at the kitchen table. "Thanks, Eleanor." She sat across from me, sipping her coffee, her eyes sparkling with an almost unsettling cheerfulness. "So, what's the plan for today? Do you want to hit up the farmer's market? Maybe we can grab some fresh produce for dinner tonight." I stared at her, struggling to reconcile this version of her, the loving, attentive wife, planning our day with such domestic bliss, with the woman who had openly, almost gleefully, joked about my predictability while showering another man with praise in front of all our friends. "Sure," I managed to say, the word a dry husk in my throat. "That sounds good." Just then, her phone buzzed softly on the counter. She reached for it with an almost involuntary reflex, her fingers already poised, and quickly glanced at the screen before setting it face down with a practiced motion. I felt my stomach clench again, a familiar wave of unease washing over me. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, conversational. "Just work stuff," she replied, her gaze flitting away from mine, avoiding direct eye contact. "Nothing important." I nodded, forcing myself to drop the subject, to let it lie. But the unease lingered, a persistent, gnawing feeling that I simply couldn't ignore, a discordant note in the symphony of our perfect life. That evening, we went to the farmer's market as planned. Eleanor was her usual effervescent self, effortlessly chatting with vendors, haggling playfully over prices, and selecting vibrant, fresh produce with an expert eye. I tried, desperately, to mirror her energy, to immerse myself in the normalcy of it all. But my thoughts, like unruly birds, kept circling back to Marcus, to the bar, to the crushing humiliation of that toast. I hated how much space he occupied in my head, an unwelcome intruder. He wasn't supposed to matter. Not to her. Not to us. Later that night, as Eleanor curled up on the couch, engrossed in a novel, I found myself watching her, searching for subtle cues, for any signs I might have missed before. She looked up, caught my gaze, and offered me a soft, loving smile. For a fleeting moment, I almost convinced myself that everything truly was fine, that my fears were merely the products of an overactive imagination, a momentary lapse in trust. But then her phone buzzed again, a discreet vibration on the coffee table beside her. And she reached for it, so quickly, so instinctively, her hand already moving before the sound had fully registered, that my chest tightened, a cold vice clamping around my heart. I wanted to ask her again, to press her for answers, to demand the truth. But a paralyzing fear held me captive. I was terrified of what I might find, terrified that the fragile facade of our life would shatter irrevocably with a single, honest answer. Instead, I stayed silent, hoping against hope that I was wrong, praying that my unwavering trust in her wasn't entirely misplaced. But deep down, in the deepest, most intuitive part of me, I already knew the truth. Something wasn't right. And sooner or later, whether I wanted it or not, I was going to find out what it was. That night, sleep was an elusive, cruel mockery. I lay rigidly on my back, staring up at the darkened ceiling, the soft, rhythmic hum of the central air conditioner the only sound in the suffocating stillness of the room. Eleanor was fast asleep beside me, her breathing steady and peaceful, a testament to her seemingly untroubled conscience. I envied her ability to drift off so easily, to surrender to oblivion, while my own mind raced with a frantic, desperate energy, churning with questions I lacked the courage to voice, the answers to which I dreaded. Her phone sat innocently on the nightstand, its screen a dark, silent rectangle. It hadn't buzzed for a while, a deceptive calm. But the image of her snatching it so quickly earlier, the dismissive wave of her hand when I asked who she was texting, the ease with which she had brushed off my concerns at the bar, it all screamed of a carefully constructed deception. It felt too convenient, too practiced. I told myself not to look. I wrestled with the urge, reminding myself that invading her privacy was a boundary I had always deemed sacred, a line I never wanted to cross. But the unease in my chest was a relentless, suffocating presence, a heavy, icy weight pressing down on me, demanding release. My desperation for answers, for clarity in the swirling chaos of my suspicions, finally outweighed my ingrained sense of guilt. I needed to know. I had to know. I waited until her breathing deepened, becoming slower, more regular, the unmistakable sign of deep, unconscious sleep. Slowly, meticulously, I reached across her, my hand trembling slightly as it closed around her phone. My fingers fumbled for a moment, and then, with a muscle memory born of countless shared moments, I entered the passcode I had known for years. The screen flared to life, illuminating the darkness with its cold, blue glow. It felt profoundly wrong, a violation of trust, but the crushing weight of my uncertainty propelled me forward. The first thing that slammed into my vision was the stream of messages from Marcus. My stomach dropped with a sickening lurch, a cold wave of nausea washing over me as I scrolled through their conversation. At first, the text seemed innocent enough, mundane work-related questions, light-hearted jokes about their demanding boss, the kind of camaraderie that could plausibly exist between colleagues. But as I kept reading, scrolling further back in time, the tone shifted, subtly at first, then undeniably. The messages became more personal, more intimate, each one a sharp, precise cut to my heart. Tonight was so much fun. I love how easy it is to talk to you. I can't stop thinking about that moment we shared in the hallway earlier. You're incredible. My breath hitched. The words blurred as tears, hot and stinging, welled in my eyes, blurring the damning sentences into an illegible smear. My hands trembled violently, the phone feeling impossibly heavy, as I continued to scroll, my heart splintering with every new message, every new revelation. There were dozens of them, stretching back not just days, but weeks. Full, uninhibited conversations. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. The woman I had loved more than anyone, the woman I trusted implicitly, had been sharing moments, thoughts, secrets, her very self, with someone else. And then, the photos. A selfie of Marcus and Eleanor, their faces close together, heads tilted intimately, their smiles unmistakably soft, unequivocally intimate. Another, taken at the Foundry Bar earlier that night, showed her hand resting lightly, almost possessively, on his forearm as they leaned into each other, laughing about something I wasn't privy to, a private joke, a shared secret. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, the air knocked out of my lungs, leaving me gasping for breath in the silent bedroom. The toast she made, the way she had so brazenly praised Marcus in front of everyone, mocking me with her words, it all clicked into agonizing place. It wasn't just a clumsy joke, a poorly chosen moment of levity. It was a declaration, a public acknowledgement, a subtle yet deliberate flaunting of something she believed I would never notice, never uncover. It was a cruel, public degradation. I put the phone down, my hands numb, feeling as if the blood had drained from my veins. My world, the meticulously constructed, seemingly perfect world I had built around us, was not just crumbling, it was disintegrating, atom by atom, around me. And I, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal, had no idea how to stop it, how to even begin to pick up the pieces. The woman I loved, the woman I had committed my life to, was betraying me in the most personal, intimate way possible. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled out of the bedroom, careful not to jostle the bed, careful not to wake her from her serene sleep. I found myself on the living room couch, the familiar fabric offering no comfort. The pervasive darkness of the room mirrored the cavernous emptiness that had suddenly opened up inside me. I replayed every single moment of the evening in my mind's eye, a torturous, frame-by-frame review, searching for clues, for hints I had foolishly missed. The way she had laughed, a little too freely, at his jokes, the way he had hovered around her like a moth to a flame, the ease with which she had brushed off my burgeoning concerns. It had all been there, right in front of me, glaringly obvious in hindsight, and I had, in my trusting ignorance, simply ignored it. I felt utterly stupid, a fool. How could I have been so blind, so naive? How could I have trusted her so completely when she was so clearly, so brazenly, hiding this devastating secret? The hours dragged on, each minute a leaden weight, as I sat there, a silent sentinel in the dark. My mind raced, an agonizing kaleidoscope of anger, profound sadness, and gut-wrenching disbelief. A part of me screamed to wake her up, to drag her out of her peaceful slumber, to confront her right then and there with the cold, hard evidence. But another, more rational part, knew I couldn't trust myself to remain calm, to articulate my pain without succumbing to a primal scream. I needed time. Time to process the sheer magnitude of what I had seen, to wrap my head around the shattering reality. And, most critically, time to figure out what, if anything, I could possibly do next. By the time the first faint blush of dawn began to bleed through the curtains, painting the edges of the room in a ghostly gray, I still hadn't slept. I stared at the tentative rays of light filtering through the blinds, feeling like an utter stranger in my own home, in my own skin. The life I thought I had meticulously built, brick by loving brick, was a hollow, intricate lie. And the terrifying truth was, I had no earthly idea how to move forward from this wreckage. Eleanor emerged from the bedroom a short while later, stifling a yawn as she padded into the kitchen, heading straight for the coffee maker. She didn't notice me at first, sitting there on the couch, lost in the shadows. Her attention was solely focused on the comforting ritual of brewing her morning coffee, the mundane hum of the machine a cruel counterpoint to the seismic shift within me. I watched her silently, a chilling detachment setting in, wondering with morbid fascination how she could possibly act so normal, so carefree, when my entire world had just spectacularly fallen apart. "Good morning, honey," she chirped brightly when she noticed me, a faint frown creasing her brow as she registered my presence. "Did you sleep on the couch?" I nodded, unable to meet her eyes, unable to hold her gaze without the crushing weight of everything I now knew threatening to overwhelm me. "Yeah. Couldn't sleep." Her frown deepened, a flicker of feigned concern crossing her face. "Oh. Are you okay, Ethan? You look a little pale." "No," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion, a stark contrast to the raging tempest inside me. "I'm not okay." Her smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching uncertainly. She sat down slowly, carefully, her coffee mug suspended in midair. "What's wrong, Ethan? You're scaring me." I looked at her then, truly looked at her, my eyes filled with a searing, unbearable pain and the raw, unadulterated acid of betrayal. "You tell me, Eleanor." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the confusion swiftly giving way to a dawning, sickening realization, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" I stood up, my hands trembling uncontrollably, the rage finally beginning to simmer to the surface, threatening to boil over. "Marcus. Your amazing connection. Your plans for the next rendezvous. Does any of that ring a bell, Eleanor?" Her face went utterly pale, draining of all color, leaving it a ghostly white. For a moment, a terrifying, endless moment, she didn't say anything. The silence in the kitchen, once punctuated by the gentle gurgle of the coffee maker, was now deafening, an oppressive weight that confirmed every agonizing suspicion, every gut-wrenching detail I had already uncovered. "Ethan," she began, her voice a reedy whisper, shaking violently, "I can explain. But I didn't want to hear it. Not now. Not ever." The very thought of her manufactured explanations, her desperate attempts at damage control, made my stomach churn. I turned abruptly and walked out the front door, needing space, needing air, needing to breathe, to think, to simply exist outside the confines of our shattered reality. As I stepped into the cool, crisp morning air, the first birds beginning their hesitant chirps, one thing, and one thing only, was blindingly clear: my perfect life was gone, obliterated, and I had no earthly idea how to move forward from this wreckage. It was supposed to be just another Saturday morning, the kind where the rhythmic hum of the city blends into the background, where you lose yourself in the satisfying crunch of autumn leaves underfoot during a jog, or the quiet focus of a hobby. That's how I, Alexander, had meticulously planned it, at least. The old meticulously restored 1969 Ford Mustang in my garage had been giving me grief for weeks, a persistent, metallic groan from the brakes. Finally, I had a free Saturday to replace the brake pads. The garage, a sanctuary of ordered chaos, smelled of motor oil, a rich, mechanical scent, with a faint, crisp hint of citrus cleaner I'd used earlier to scrub away the stubborn grime from the workbench. The radio was on, tuned to a classic rock station, low enough to blend into the background, a comforting, familiar drone. The rhythmic clink-clank of the wrench-turning bolts echoed in the confined space, a strangely soothing backdrop to my work, a symphony of purpose. My wife, Camilla, popped her head in from time to time, a steaming mug of artisanal coffee cradled in her hands. Her perfume, a delicate, light floral scent with undertones of jasmine, lingered each time she passed, the kind of fragrance you could close your eyes and conjure a perfect summer garden. She didn't stay long, just long enough to check on me, offer a quick, bright smile, and then disappear again, her steps light and purposeful. She mentioned her plans for the day, a routine trip to the Cypress Creek Country Club with her friend, Lauren, for a mid-morning tennis match, followed by a bit of leisurely shopping downtown. Routine. Normal. Nothing, absolutely nothing, to raise an eyebrow at. I barely looked up as she spoke, grunting a non-committal affirmation, my focus entirely on the stubborn caliper bolt, before diving back into my task. But then, as the sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the garage windows, noon came around, and the air in the garage shifted, becoming subtly charged, almost electric. Camilla walked in again, but this time, she wasn't the same woman who had been flitting in and out all morning in her comfortable athleisure wear. She wore a beige silk blend shift dress, cut to perfection, that hugged her slender figure in a way that made you pause, made you look twice, drawing the eye with its understated elegance. It was paired with incredibly elegant strappy nude sandals that clicked softly, deliberately, against the concrete garage floor, a rhythmic staccato that announced her presence. Her rich, auburn hair, usually pulled back in a casual ponytail or allowed to fall in loose, natural waves, was now meticulously styled, a sleek, sophisticated chignon that framed her face flawlessly. She looked polished, utterly impeccable. Too polished, I instinctively thought, for just an afternoon of tennis and casual shopping with Lauren. I paused, my wrench still clutched in my oil-stained hand, and glanced up at her, my brow furrowed slightly. "You look incredibly nice," I said, my tone carefully neutral, my voice a little rougher than I intended. Camilla smiled, the corners of her lips curving just enough to betray a hint of satisfaction, a knowing flicker in her eyes that she'd noticed my reaction, that her transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. She leaned down, the soft fabric of her dress brushing against my worn work jeans, and pressed a light, fleeting kiss to my cheek, the floral scent of her perfume now strikingly heavier, more intoxicating. "Don't wait for me for dinner, darling," she murmured, her voice soft, almost a caress. "Lauren and I might stay out quite late." The words themselves were simple, the tone seemingly casual, an everyday declaration. But something about them lingered, a subtle disquiet settling in the back of my mind. Maybe it was the way her perfume seemed heavier, almost cloying now, clinging to the air around her. Or perhaps it was the fleeting, almost imperceptible way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when she spoke, a brief shadow passing over them. Or maybe, just maybe, I was imagining things, a nascent paranoia beginning to bloom in the quiet corners of my mind. I didn't dwell on it then, not consciously. I went back to tightening the last bolt on the brake caliper, forcing my focus back to the immediate, tangible task at hand. By the time I meticulously poured the fresh brake fluid into the reservoir and tested the pedal, feeling its firm, responsive pressure, Camilla was gone, the click of the front door a quiet punctuation mark. The house felt significantly quieter without her, the faint hum of the radio now almost too soft to fill the sudden, vast space she'd left behind. I shrugged it off. People dress up sometimes. That's all it was, right? She and Lauren probably had some fancy, exclusive lunch spot in mind, a place where the waiters wore crisp white ties and the menu was discreetly priced, hinting at astronomical figures. Women, I rationalized, sometimes enjoyed that kind of thing, a little indulgence, a break from routine. I actively convinced myself it wasn't worth a second thought, that I was simply overthinking an innocent moment. But as the hours stretched on, as the late afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the garage in long, golden shadows, I found myself thinking about that elegant dress, those delicate sandals, and the almost too casual way she had said not to wait for her, the slight averted gaze. Looking back, I realized that was the very first, almost imperceptible crack in the foundation of my meticulously built, seemingly unshakable world. A small fissure, almost imperceptible, the kind you don't notice until it begins to spiderweb, slowly but relentlessly, through the entire structure. But at the time, I didn't know any of that. I just figured it was another perfectly ordinary Saturday, and Camilla was simply doing what Camilla did, living her vibrant, social life, just as I was living mine. If only it had stayed that simple. If only I hadn't, in the following days, started to pay closer attention, to notice the subtle anomalies. Maybe then, just maybe, everything would have stayed intact, whole, and I wouldn't have found myself, weeks later, standing amidst the devastating wreckage of what used to be our perfectly constructed life. But cracks, as I was soon to learn, have an insidious way of growing. And sometimes, all it takes is one small, seemingly insignificant moment, one faint tremor, to start pulling at the thread that eventually unravels absolutely everything. Sunday mornings in our meticulously maintained suburban house were usually a sanctuary of quiet rhythms. Camilla, a late riser on weekends, cherished her extra hours of sleep, often emerging closer to noon. I, in turn, used that serene time to catch up on various odds and ends around the house, the small, satisfying chores that kept our domestic sphere humming smoothly. That particular Sunday, I decided to tackle the ever-growing pile of laundry, a multicolored mountain that had been threatening to spill out of the wicker basket in our utility room. I didn't give it much thought. Laundry was laundry, a mindless, tactile task designed to keep my hands busy and my mind unoccupied until Camilla woke up and we could share our leisurely breakfast. I sorted through the clothes like usual, my worn t-shirts and sturdy jeans, Camilla's delicate silk blouses and yoga leggings. My hands moved with familiar efficiency until something unexpected snagged my attention. It was subtle at first, a texture that didn't belong, a luxurious smoothness that felt entirely alien among the familiar cotton and synthetics. I pulled it out, holding it up to the soft, diffused morning light filtering through the utility room window. It was a black silk tie, undeniably smooth, exquisitely made, and clearly expensive. It felt entirely, jarringly, out of place in my world. I frowned, a deep crease forming between my eyebrows. It wasn't mine. I didn't even own a tie of this opulent quality or modern cut. I turned it over in my hands, scrutinizing it, searching for a clue, any identifying mark, a brand tag, subtle initials embroidered on the lining, something, anything that would explain its perplexing presence in my laundry. Nothing. It was pristine, unblemished, the kind of tie a man would wear with a bespoke tailored suit to a high-powered corporate meeting or a formal gala. I tried to recall the last time anyone dressed with such meticulous formality had been in our home, but the answer eluded me. We didn't host fancy dinner parties, our social circle was decidedly casual, jeans, sneakers, and barbecue types. This tie, with its unspoken air of sophistication, simply did not belong. At first, I tried to rationalize it away, to dismiss it as nothing. Perhaps it had been inadvertently left behind after some long-forgotten, semi-formal gathering at a friend's house. Or maybe Camilla, with her vast network and penchant for helping others, had borrowed it for a reason I couldn't fathom, assisting a friend with event planning or picking up stray items for a colleague. It wasn't unusual for her to be involved in such things. But still, something about it nagged at me, a tiny, insistent voice in the back of my mind refusing to be silenced. I carefully hung it on the edge of the laundry room cabinet, a silent, dark question mark, and walked away, attempting to banish it from my thoughts. It didn't feel worth confronting her about, not yet. I wasn't the kind of man to cause a scene over something so trivial, so easily explainable. But the thought, a sharp, unsettling shard, lingered, stubbornly refusing to dissolve. Every time I passed the laundry room, the tie was there, a quiet, accusatory reminder that I didn't have a satisfactory answer. Later that evening, Camilla came home. She seemed exceptionally relaxed, almost glowing, radiating the quiet contentment of someone who had spent their day unwinding, thoroughly enjoying themselves. We settled into the living room, a familiar tableau. She scrolled through her phone, occasionally chuckling at something on the screen, while I aimlessly flipped through TV channels, the drone of the news providing a superficial soundtrack to my churning thoughts. The black silk tie, a dark phantom, was still on my mind. I decided to introduce the subject, as casually as I could manage, as if it had only just occurred to me. "Hey, Camilla," I said, my voice carefully modulated, "do you happen to know where that tie came from?" "The black silk one. I found it in the laundry this morning." Her eyes flicked toward the utility room, a swift, almost imperceptible movement. For a brief moment, a split second that barely registered on a conscious level, her brow creased, a faint, almost pained line appearing between her eyebrows. It was subtle, the kind of micro-expression most people wouldn't catch, a fleeting ripple beneath her composed surface. Then, just as quickly, she laughed, a light, easy sound, perhaps a little too easy. "Oh, that's Richard's," she said, her voice smooth, untroubled. "We were helping him organize props for his company's anniversary party last week. I must have accidentally thrown it in my bag with some other things." The answer was smooth, almost too practiced, a perfectly plausible explanation. Richard was a mutual friend, a successful, impeccably dressed lawyer, exactly the kind of guy who would own a tie like that. It made perfect sense. Yet, something in her tone, a faint, almost imperceptible dissonance, didn't sit right with me. I nodded, feigning acceptance, letting it go. "Makes sense," I said, keeping my voice even, unrevealing. But as she turned back to her phone, her fingers already resuming their rapid dance across the screen, I couldn't help but notice how quickly the faint crease in her brow had disappeared, as if a switch had been flipped, a carefully constructed door slamming shut on whatever fleeting emotion had been there for that brief, fleeting moment. That night, as I lay in bed beside Camilla, the lights off, the room bathed in the faint, ghostly glow of the street lamp outside, my mind replayed the entire interaction. I thought about the tie, a tangible piece of silk now imbued with an unsettling weight. I thought about her quick, practiced answer, about the way her laugh had felt just a little too light, a fraction too effortless. Her explanation, while perfectly plausible, felt just a little too polished, too rehearsed. It wasn't enough to accuse her of anything, not yet. But it was more than enough to plant a potent seed of doubt, to nurture the insidious growth of suspicion. Looking back, it's strange how something so small, so seemingly insignificant, can suddenly hold so much unbearable weight. A tie, just a simple piece of fabric. But in that moment, in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, it became something infinitely more, a question I couldn't shake, a mystery that felt like it might grow, slowly, inexorably, if I didn't keep a vigilant eye on it. I told myself to let it go, to trust her, as I always had. But trust, I was beginning to learn, is a fragile, delicate thing. And once it's cracked, no matter how small the fissure, you can't help but wonder, with a cold, unsettling dread, when it will finally shatter into irreparable pieces. By the following weekend, I desperately tried to convince myself that the black silk tie was behind me. Camilla had offered an explanation, plausible enough, and there was no concrete, irrefutable reason to doubt her. Yet, something about that moment, the almost imperceptible crease in her brow, the overly practiced cadence of her answer, lingered stubbornly in the back of my mind, like a microscopic splinter under the skin, irritating, refusing to dislodge. And it wasn't long before another oddity, another unsettling inconsistency, surfaced, pulling at that very same thread of unease. It started innocently enough. We had planned a spontaneous Sunday picnic, one of those rare, perfect moments where life slows down, and you get to savor the simple, ephemeral joys. I volunteered to clean out Camilla's car, a meticulous detailer at heart, to make ample room for the oversized cooler and our vintage wool blankets. I figured I'd find the usual suspects, a couple of reusable grocery bags, a scattering of old receipts from coffee shops or boutiques, maybe a forgotten pair of sunglasses, an empty coffee cup or two. Instead, I found something I wouldn't ignore. Tucked discreetly into the farthest corner of the trunk, partially hidden beneath a folded emergency umbrella and a car care kit, was a small, exquisitely crafted velvet box. My heart did a strange, unsettling lurch, a sudden, cold flip in my chest, as my fingers closed around it. It was heavier than I expected, a solid, reassuring weight that immediately suggested significant value. Slowly, almost reverently, I clicked open the delicate clasp. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, were a pair of gleaming gold cufflinks, polished to a mirror shine, catching the ambient light. They were intricately engraved with a stark, elegant flourish, the initials AR. I stared at them for a long, agonizing moment, my mind racing, a dizzying carousel of questions. They were undeniably elegant, the kind of accessory a man would wear to a high-stakes business meeting, a formal gala, or a sophisticated black tie event. They were definitively not mine, my taste was more utilitarian, my jewelry limited to my wedding band and a simple watch. And while Camilla was meticulously organized about her own belongings, this wasn't something she'd carelessly toss into her trunk and forget about. Who, I thought, with a sudden, suffocating constriction in my chest, was AR? I closed the box, the soft click of the clasp echoing the finality in my heart. My fingers lingered on the soft velvet, a visceral link to this unsettling discovery. Should I confront her right away? The impulse was strong, a primal urge to demand answers. But no, not yet. I needed to think, to process, to formulate a coherent strategy. So, with a careful hand, I put the box back exactly where I had found it, meticulously repositioning the umbrella to obscure it, and went about cleaning the car as if nothing had happened, my movements stiff, almost robotic. That night, the gold cufflinks, a gleaming, silent accusation, gnawed at me. As we lay in bed, the lights off, the room bathed in the faint, ethereal glow of the street lamp outside, I decided to bring them up. My voice, when I spoke into the darkness, was casual, almost disinterested, a carefully constructed facade. I found some cufflinks in your car today, I said, hoping to catch her off guard, to gauge her immediate, unfiltered reaction. Camilla shifted beside me, the rustle of the sheets barely audible, then propped herself up on one elbow. Her silhouette was calm against the pale moonlight, but her voice, when she spoke, carried a faint, almost imperceptible edge of surprise, a slight hesitation. Cufflinks, she repeated, as if she hadn't quite heard me correctly, or was buying time. Oh. Those must be Richard's again. We were organizing an auction for work, a charity gala last week, and he asked me to hold on to them for safekeeping. I completely forgot they were there. Her explanation was quick, smooth, almost too smooth. It was plausible, certainly, echoing her previous story about the tie. But there was nothing in her tone that hinted at genuine panic, no telltale stammer or rise in pitch. If anything, she sounded slightly annoyed with herself for being forgetful, for her momentary lapse in meticulousness. I couldn't find an obvious crack in her story, nothing to directly contradict her. So I nodded, rolling onto my back, feigning acceptance. Makes sense, I said, my voice carefully neutral, burying my doubts. But it didn't make sense. Not entirely. The box had been in the trunk, buried under other items, almost as if it had been deliberately hidden. If she was merely holding onto them for a work event, why not keep them in her office, or somewhere more accessible, less secluded? And why hadn't she mentioned them until now? The questions, like insidious tendrils, began to coil around my thoughts. Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns, subtle shifts in her behavior, small things that, taken individually, might be dismissed as innocuous, but together, began to paint a disturbing picture. Her phone, which she used to leave face up on the kitchen counter, notifications visible, was now always, without fail, face down, its screen a dark, impenetrable mirror. She began staying out later than usual, often citing vague, last-minute excuses about unexpected work commitments or spontaneous plans with friends I barely knew. When I asked about her day, her answers were polished, concise, almost brief, as if she were reading from a meticulously crafted script, offering just enough information to satisfy without revealing anything substantial. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was simply stringing together unrelated, innocent events to construct a dark narrative that didn't exist. But each new inconsistency, each carefully delivered half-truth, felt like another delicate thread being pulled from the intricately woven fabric of our life together, slowly unraveling its integrity. Then there was the gym. Camilla had always been diligent about staying fit, her workouts a sacred, solitary ritual. But her routine suddenly became more erratic, less predictable, extra trips on weekdays, spontaneous, unscheduled sessions on weekends. When I casually offered to join her for a class, hoping to re-establish a shared activity, she laughed, a light, almost dismissive sound, and said, "Oh, darling, that's my alone time. My sanctuary." None of it, taken on its own, a misplaced tie, a pair of cufflinks, extra gym visits, was damning. But together, these disparate pieces slowly, relentlessly, began forming a picture, a mosaic of suspicion that I desperately didn't want to see, a truth I instinctively recoiled from. I found myself retracing her steps in my mind, replaying conversations, analyzing her tone of voice, searching for hidden inflections, foretells. There was nothing concrete, no smoking gun, no undeniable evidence that I could confront her with, no single piece of proof that would stand up to scrutiny. But the emotional distance between us, once negligible, was growing, widening into a chasm. I wasn't the kind of man to jump to wild conclusions, to indulge in baseless accusations. But I wasn't stupid either. Camilla had always been an open book to me, transparent in her affections, candid in her communication. But now, it felt as though she was writing entire, clandestine chapters of her life without me, without my knowledge, without my consent. The trust that had once been the very foundation of our marriage, that bedrock of shared intimacy, was beginning to crack, slowly, subtly, insidiously. And the thing about cracks, as I was learning to my profound sorrow, is that they only get bigger if you ignore them. They spread, they deepen, until eventually, they threaten to bring the entire structure crashing down. By this point, the relentless, gnawing feeling in my gut had become impossible to ignore. Something was profoundly, fundamentally off. Camilla's explanations, whenever an oddity surfaced, were always too neat, too polished, almost rehearsed. And although they often aligned perfectly with the surface-level evidence, they left a bitter, metallic aftertaste, a lingering sense of disquiet. This wasn't simple jealousy, nor was it mere paranoia. It was something deeper, a primal instinct that screamed of deception, a persistent inner voice I couldn't silence, no matter how hard I tried. But I wasn't ready to confront her outright. Not yet. If I was going to take that monumental step, if I was going to risk shattering our world entirely, I needed proof. Real, undeniable, incontrovertible proof that would leave no room for doubt, no space for her practiced explanations. I decided to proceed carefully, methodically, like a forensic investigator assembling a case. Camilla was sharp, intelligent, and if she was indeed hiding something of this magnitude, she was doing it with masterful precision. One misstep on my part, one moment of impulsiveness, could ruin everything, allowing her to further obscure the truth and escape accountability. I decided to start with a simple, subtle test. One evening, Camilla informed me she'd be out with Lauren again, this time for dinner at the Oak and Vine, a high-end farm-to-table restaurant they frequented. It sounded utterly routine, nothing out of the ordinary, a perfect cover. But I decided to call her about 45 minutes after she left, under the pretense of needing her help finding something innocuous. "Hey, Camilla," I said, keeping my voice as casual, as unconcerned as possible, the words a careful tightrope walk. "Sorry to bother you, but I can't for the life of me find the kitchen renovation contract. You remember, the one from last year? Do you happen to remember where you filed it?" There was a noticeable pause on the other end, just long enough to make me wonder if I'd caught her off guard, if the carefully constructed facade had momentarily slipped. Then, her tone softened, becoming steady, calm, perfectly normal. "Oh, darling, it's in the blue folder in the hallway drawer, in the second compartment from the top. You must have just missed it." I listened carefully, my senses heightened, straining to pick up every nuance. Not just to her voice, but to the background noise. I could hear the faint, ambient hum of conversations, the occasional delicate clink of wine glasses, and soft, understated jazz music, exactly what you'd expect at an upscale restaurant. Everything, on the surface, checked out. She even asked if I'd eaten dinner, a seemingly thoughtful question that momentarily seemed to reaffirm her innocence, her concern for me. But just as I was about to hang up, to dismiss my fears, I caught something. A male voice, faint but distinct, perhaps from a nearby table, drifted into the phone's receiver. "Hey, Camilla, everything okay?" I froze. It wasn't a big deal, not really. It could have been a waiter, a manager, another diner nearby. But the familiar, almost possessive tone in his voice didn't sit right with me. It was too personal, too intimate for a stranger, for a simple colleague. The next day, I checked the drawer she'd mentioned. The renovation contract was there, precisely where she said it would be, tucked neatly into the blue folder. Everything lined up, a perfect, logical explanation. Yet, that faint male voice, imbued with an unnerving familiarity, still lingered in my mind, a ghost refusing to be laid to rest. The second phase of my plan required a little more effort, a step further into the moral gray zone. I had a small, high-tech GPS tracker, something I primarily used during long road trips to ensure I didn't get hopelessly lost in unfamiliar territories. It was incredibly small, discreet, and remarkably easy to install. That morning, while Camilla was in the shower, the gentle cascade of water masking my movements, I slipped into the garage. With practiced hands, I carefully tucked the tracker into the trunk of her sleek black SUV, securely hidden beneath the carpet lining. It was virtually invisible, a silent, unseen eye, and linked seamlessly to a covert app on my phone. That evening, when Camilla left for another supposed outing with Lauren, I opened the app and watched her route unfold on the digital map, a glowing blue line tracing her path. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. She drove directly to the Oak and Vine restaurant, the blinking dot on my screen settling there for approximately 2 hours, remaining stationary. Then, as the third hour ticked by, the car started moving again. This time, the tracker showed her heading away from the bustling city center, toward a quiet, affluent residential area on the outskirts of town. I knew the area well, it wasn't near any other restaurants, or shops, or any discernible landmarks. My pulse quickened, a frantic drumbeat in my ears, as I stared at the relentless, blinking dot on the screen. When Camilla came home later that night, her key turning softly in the lock, I tried to sound as casual, as nonchalant as possible, my voice an exercise in forced normalcy. "How was dinner, darling? Did you and Lauren stop anywhere else afterward? Somewhere for a nightcap?" She smiled, her expression as calm and unruffled as ever, her eyes meeting mine without a flicker of deceit. "Oh, yes. You won't believe it. Lauren completely forgot her phone at the restaurant, so we had to circle around her neighborhood, looking for it for what felt like an eternity. Can you imagine? Almost 10 minutes of driving in frustrating circles before we finally found it." Her explanation was flawless, seamless, matching the intricate route I'd seen on the tracker, every stop, every turn, every seemingly innocent detour. It all added up perfectly. Yet, something still felt off, a persistent, discordant note in the carefully constructed melody of her story. The third part of my plan involved one of the most basic, yet potent, senses, smell. Camilla had a favorite silk shawl, a delicate, intricately patterned garment she wore whenever she went out in the evening, a signature accessory. But this time, she had left without it. When she came home, as she shed her coat, her dress carried a faint, distinctly unfamiliar scent. It wasn't her usual light, floral perfume. This was something musky, undeniably masculine, a subtle but unmistakable aroma of men's cologne. "Did something happen?" I asked, feigning a concerned wrinkle in my brow, fighting to keep my voice even, unsuspecting. "You smell different tonight, somehow." Camilla laughed softly, a light, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, darling, that's just the waiter. He was incredibly clumsy, spilled some cologne on me while clearing the table. Happens all the time in busy restaurants, you know." Her answer was quick, almost too quick, a practiced deflection. But my gut, that primal, unwavering instinct, screamed otherwise. The inconsistencies. The vague, yet perfectly plausible, explanations. The subtle shifts in her behavior. They were all starting to coalesce, each piece of the puzzle, seemingly innocent on its own, now combining to paint a grim, undeniable picture. Camilla was hiding something. I didn't know what it was yet, not precisely, but I was determined to find out. The next step wasn't just about gathering more evidence, it was about escalation. If she was going to continue to keep secrets, if she was going to persist in this intricate dance of deception, then I was going to uncover them. And I wasn't going to do it alone. I don't know what was worse, the spiraling doubts that relentlessly circled in my head, a flock of crows picking at my peace, or the growing, chilling realization that I was now actively, methodically, trying to find something damning. It's a strange dichotomy, isn't it? A part of you, the part that still clings to hope, desperately wishes you're wrong, that it's all an elaborate delusion, a figment of your stressed imagination. While another, darker part, driven by a desperate need for truth, keeps whispering, dig deeper, keep digging. By now, though, it was no longer just about the tie, the cufflinks, or the faint, lingering smell of cologne. It was about Camilla herself, the subtle, unnerving shifts in her behavior, the way her responses felt too polished, almost rehearsed, the creeping sense of emotional distance that had silently invaded our once intimate conversations. I decided it was time to bring in reinforcements. Not the kind who would gossip or immediately jump to baseless conclusions, or offer saccharine advice, but people I trusted implicitly. Men who had stood by me through thick and thin, through life's inevitable complexities. I needed fresh eyes, objective perspectives that weren't clouded by the raw, churning emotions I was wrestling with. Ethan, my best friend from college, was the first who came to mind. He was a brilliant, analytical mind, a guy who could pick apart a situation with the meticulous precision of a detective in a high-stakes crime novel, seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. Then there was Noah, my neighbor, a quiet but incredibly astute software engineer, who owed me a significant favor after I'd helped him save thousands by expertly repairing his complex roofing system last summer, preventing a catastrophic leak. Lastly, Victor, a former military intelligence operative, whose instincts were sharper than anyone I knew, honed by years of active duty. He still owed me for a substantial loan I'd given him for his sister's emergency, life-saving surgery. Together, they formed an unlikely but formidable team, a trio of loyalty and diverse expertise that I could trust without question. When I explained everything to them, we were gathered in my garage, the air thick with the familiar, comforting smell of motor oil, now mingled with the faint, acrid scent of stale cigarette smoke from Victor's earlier indulgence. I laid it all out, meticulously detailing every anomaly, every disquieting observation, the misplaced tie, the perplexing cufflinks, the GPS tracker's revealing route, the strange, lingering scent, and Camilla's too perfect, too polished responses. I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong, I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal turmoil. But something doesn't add up, and I need to know what's going on. I need the truth, whatever it is. Ethan was the first to speak, his expression grim but resolute. You're doing the right thing, man. If she's hiding something, we'll find out. If not, at least you'll have peace of mind, a definitive answer. Noah nodded slowly, his thoughtful gaze fixed on the floor. But we've got to be smart about this. No amateur sleuthing, no obvious moves that could tip her off. Victor, arms crossed over his broad chest, his face unreadable, added with a low, gravelly voice, subtlety is key. Let her think she's in control, let her believe her deception is working, while we meticulously gather the pieces, brick by brick. Their words, though stark, were reassuring, a quiet balm to my frayed nerves. But the road ahead still felt uncertain, fraught with unseen dangers. I wasn't a man prone to paranoia, but this situation, this insidious unraveling of my life, was testing every limit of my emotional and mental fortitude. I needed clarity, desperately, and they were going to help me get it. Our first move was simple, surveillance. Ethan, with his tech-savvy background, had a state-of-the-art drone, a quiet, almost imperceptible model with an impressive battery life and an excellent, high-definition camera. If Camilla's outings involved more than what she was telling me, if there was a clandestine rendezvous, we'd see it, capture it. Ethan operated the drone like a seasoned professional, keeping a safe, almost undetectable distance as Camilla's sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot of a high-end downtown restaurant one crisp evening. At first glance, everything seemed perfectly normal. She met a group of smartly dressed individuals, likely colleagues, their laughter echoing faintly across the asphalt. But then, she stepped out onto the secluded terrace alone, her back to the bustling street, her face tense, drawn, as she spoke intently into her phone. The drone's camera, despite its advanced capabilities, couldn't pick up audio over the restaurant's ambient noise and the city's distant hum, but her hand gestures were telling, subtle but urgent, almost agitated, as if she were desperately trying to explain something vital, to plead her case. Meanwhile, Noah played his part on the ground. Armed with a leash and his enormous, surprisingly gentle Great Dane, Max, he strolled casually around the restaurant's perimeter, a seemingly innocuous dog walker in an upscale neighborhood. His relaxed demeanor and Max's imposing but friendly presence didn't draw much attention. He managed to strategically position himself to overhear snippets of Camilla's hushed conversation. "No, I can't right now, it's too risky. We need to finish this by Friday." The tone wasn't romantic, wasn't affectionate. If anything, Camilla sounded scared, almost desperate. It raised more questions than it answered, adding layers of complexity to an already convoluted mystery. Victor, ever the strategist, took the next, more audacious step. Using a carefully constructed fake name and a polished, convincing persona as a potential high-value client, he scheduled a discreet appointment at Camilla's workplace, her prestigious marketing firm. He observed her closely during a staged meeting with her boss, Caleb Thorne, a man known for his ruthless business acumen and impenetrable facade. Their conversation, when Caleb briefly joined Camilla at her desk, was quiet, hushed, almost conspiratorial. But Victor, with his finely tuned auditory perception, caught enough to understand that the stakes were incredibly high. Phrases like, "if this gets out," and "the company won't survive," stood out like neon signs in the low hum of the office. Whatever was happening, it wasn't a petty, personal affair. It was far more serious, entangled with professional ramifications. We regrouped in my garage that night, the air heavy with unanswered questions, each of us nursing a mug of strong, black coffee. Each man had brought back crucial pieces of the puzzle, but the full picture still frustratingly eluded us. Victor, with his characteristic precision, summarized it best: "This isn't just about an affair, Alexander. Whatever she's caught up in, it's bigger than that. Much bigger." The word "bigger" settled in my chest like a lead weight, heavy, oppressive. For the first time, a chilling thought began to take root: what if Camilla wasn't just an unfaithful wife? What if she was in over her head? What if she was a victim of something far grander, a dangerous conspiracy she couldn't control? Or worse, infinitely worse, what if she was an active, willing participant in this hidden scheme? One thing was undeniably clear: I couldn't stop now. I had to know the truth, the whole, unvarnished truth, no matter where it led, no matter how painful the revelations. And this, I knew, was just the beginning. The pieces of the puzzle were indeed starting to fall into place, but they still didn't form a complete, coherent picture. The black silk tie, the enigmatic cufflinks, the faint, lingering male voice on the phone, the cryptic snippets of conversation overheard at the restaurant, none of it screamed outright, unequivocal marital betrayal in isolation. But they didn't sit right either. It was as though Camilla had meticulously constructed a carefully curated facade, a shimmering illusion of normalcy, and no matter how polished or seamless it appeared, tiny, almost imperceptible cracks were beginning to form, threatening to expose the ugliness beneath. Victor's observation from her workplace, his gravelly voice echoing in my mind, resonated with chilling clarity: "If this gets out, the company won't survive." Those words, chilling in their implication, echoed relentlessly in my head, a persistent, disquieting refrain. What could possibly be so damaging, so devastating, so dangerous that it had both Camilla and her notoriously unflappable boss, Caleb Thorne, speaking in hushed, urgent tones behind closed office doors? And why, I wondered again, did Camilla look so undeniably tense, so visibly stressed, when she thought no one was watching, when her public smile was momentarily dropped? I decided it was time for a more direct, yet still subtle, course of action. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. The emotional fallout would be catastrophic, and I still lacked the irrefutable evidence I craved. But I needed to get closer, to observe her in her natural environment, specifically her office, without her knowing that her every move was being scrutinized. That's when Ethan, ever the ingenious tech solutionist, came through with an idea that was as simple as it was brilliant. "I've got something for you," he said one night, as we huddled again in my garage, the scent of motor oil and distant city sounds providing a backdrop to our clandestine meeting. He reached into a small, nondescript bag and pulled out a sleek, elegant velvet pen box. He opened it with a flourish. Inside was a single, highly polished, entirely unassuming executive pen. "It's not just a pen," he explained, turning it over in his hand, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He pointed to a tiny, almost invisible camera lens, no bigger than a pinprick, embedded subtly near the clip. "Give her this. Say it's a corporate gift, a thoughtful gesture, something professional for her desk. She'll never suspect it. The battery life is excellent, and it streams discreetly to a secure server." It was perfect. A simple, unobtrusive way to keep a silent, unseen eye on her office interactions, to capture the raw, unedited truth of her professional life. The next morning, feigning casualness, I left it on the kitchen counter with a small, handwritten note, "Thought you'd like this for work. Looks professional." When Camilla saw it, her face lit up with a genuine smile, or what appeared to be one. She thanked me warmly, tucked it into her designer handbag without a second thought, and left for work. That evening, as I reviewed the newly recorded footage with Ethan and Noah in the hushed intimacy of my study, my stomach clenched into a hard, cold knot. The camera, positioned perfectly on her desk, was angled slightly askew, capturing only part of her workspace but providing a clear view of the doorway, a crucial vantage point. At first, the day's activity seemed entirely routine, Camilla typing away diligently on her laptop, taking calls with polite efficiency, occasionally glancing at her phone. But then, the energy in the room shifted instantly, becoming taut, charged with an unspoken tension. Caleb Thorne walked in. He didn't bother to knock, he simply entered, closing the office door behind him with a soft, ominous click that echoed in the recording. Camilla's body stiffened, her fingers pausing mid-typing, her shoulders visibly tensing. Caleb leaned over her desk, his posture dominating, his voice low, almost a growl, but undeniably firm. The camera, despite its tiny microphone, didn't pick up every single word, muffled by the office environment, but it caught enough to send a chilling wave down my spine, a cold premonition of disaster. "You understand what's at stake, Camilla," Caleb said, his tone sharp, edged with a dangerous warning. "This isn't optional. Not anymore." Camilla's voice, when she finally responded, was quiet, hesitant, almost a plea. "I know, Caleb, but I'm running out of time. I don't want to do this." "You don't have a choice," Caleb snapped, cutting her off, his voice rising imperceptibly. "If Alexander finds out," he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air, a sword dangling by a thread over my head. Camilla turned her face slightly away from the camera's gaze, but her shoulders slumped, visibly burdened, as though the weight of the world had just settled upon them. Caleb straightened, smoothing the expensive fabric of his suit jacket, adjusting his tie with a meticulous gesture. "You'll do what needs to be done. You don't want this getting out any more than I do." With that, he turned and left, closing the door behind him with the same unsettling click. Camilla remained seated, her head in her hands, her body trembling, ever so slightly, with silent anguish. The footage ended there, but it was more than enough. My mind raced, a dizzying carousel of agonizing questions. What, precisely, didn't Camilla want me to find out? What leverage, what dark secret, was Caleb Thorne holding over her? And why, in the cruelest twist of all, did it seem like she was trapped, ensnared in something far, far bigger, more dangerous than just the two of us? I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying desperately to make sense of what I'd seen, to reconcile the terrified woman on the screen with the composed, loving wife I thought I knew. Part of me, the primal, injured part, wanted to confront her immediately, to unleash my fury, to demand answers and lay all her secrets bare. But the other part, the rational, calculating part, knew better. I needed more. If I was going to confront Camilla, if I was going to engineer her final exposure, I couldn't go in half-cocked. I needed something undeniable, something irrefutable, something that would leave her no escape, no room for deflection or further lies. The next day, I called Victor. She's in over her head, I said, my voice grim, devoid of emotion. But I still don't know how much of this is her doing, and how much is forced. Victor didn't miss a beat, his voice firm. Then we keep digging, Alexander. No assumptions, no accusations, no emotional outbursts. Just the facts. We gather every single, cold, hard piece. And so, we pressed on, a silent, relentless machine, determined to uncover the absolute truth, no matter how messy or painful it turned out to be. The cracks in Camilla's carefully constructed facade were widening, deepening with every passing hour. Soon, I knew, the whole deceptive structure would come crashing down. I just wasn't sure if I was truly ready for the devastating reality I might find buried beneath the rubble. The footage of Caleb and Camilla's tense, hushed exchange played on a relentless loop in my mind, a tormenting internal cinema. I could no longer, not even for a fleeting second, convince myself that this was about a simple misunderstanding, a series of unfortunate coincidences. The chilling weight of Caleb's words, "If Alexander finds out," pressed down on me like a lead blanket, suffocating my last vestiges of hope. I still wrestled with the agonizing uncertainty of whether Camilla was a terrified victim or a willing accomplice, caught in a web of her own making. But the time for wondering, for agonizing over possibilities, was definitively over. I needed answers, and I needed them with an immediacy that bordered on desperation. The opportunity, as fate would have it, came sooner than I expected, almost a cruel gift. Camilla had left her personal laptop open on the living room coffee table one evening, after returning late from what she claimed was an exhausting work session. It was an uncharacteristic lapse. She was meticulously organized, always logging out or taking her devices to the bedroom for privacy. I waited. I waited until I heard the distinct sound of the shower running upstairs, the rush of water masking any potential noise I might make. Then, quietly, methodically, I sat down at the coffee table. My hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, as I debated, in those crucial seconds, whether to cross this ultimate line. I told myself it wasn't mere snooping, it was the relentless pursuit of the truth, a necessary, if agonizing, step to preserve whatever fractured remnants of trust might still exist between us. I clicked on her messaging application, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, echoing in my ears. The chat window with Caleb Thorne was already open, the most recent messages glaring back at me like a fresh, brutal slap in the face, undeniable in their damning clarity. "Caleb, are you sure about tomorrow? You can still back out, Camilla." "Camilla, no. I've made up my mind. I want to move forward." "Caleb, the hotel is booked. Room 213. I'll meet you there at 7. "Camilla, understood. I'll be there." The words hit me like a freight train, a sudden, concussive force that stole my breath. There was no ambiguity here, no wiggle room for doubt, no remote possibility of misinterpretation. Camilla wasn't being manipulated, she was actively, willingly participating. Whatever clandestine operation was underway, she had consciously, deliberately chosen this path. I snapped a quick, silent picture of the screen with my phone, preserving the damning evidence. Then, with meticulous care, I closed the laptop, returning it to its exact original position, as if I had never touched it. I sat back on the couch, staring blankly into the darkened room, as the full, horrifying realization settled in. She wasn't just hiding something, she was actively, comprehensively, deceiving me. The next day, my resolve hardened into a cold, unbreakable steel. I began preparing for the inevitable confrontation, not with reckless anger, but with the chilling precision of a calculated strike. I couldn't go in blindly, fueled by raw emotion, that would only lead to chaos, to a screaming match she could easily deflect or deny. No, I needed a plan, a methodical, calculated approach. This wasn't just about satisfying my morbid curiosity anymore, it was about protecting myself, about reclaiming my home, about salvaging my dignity, and safeguarding everything I had worked for. I installed a small, high-definition camera in Camilla's car, carefully tucking it into the dashboard's plastic lining, virtually invisible to the naked eye. With the live feed linked to a secure app on my phone, I could watch her movements, hear her conversations, in real time. That evening, when she announced, with her usual practiced smile, that she was heading out for another late work meeting, I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel fading into the distance. Then, I opened the app. Camilla's route was predictable at first. She drove directly to a high-end restaurant downtown, parking in a secluded, dimly lit corner of the lot, a spot seemingly chosen for its discretion. Moments later, Caleb Thorne appeared, walking briskly toward her car, his silhouette unmistakable. He opened the passenger door and climbed inside. My pulse quickened, a frantic drumbeat in my ears, as I watched their interaction unfold on the small screen. The audio was faint, barely audible over the hum of the city, but clear enough to distinguish the tension, the low urgency in their voices. "Are you sure about this, Camilla?" Caleb's voice, gravelly and low, cut through the static. "There's no going back after tonight. Once this is done, it's done." Camilla's reply was equally clear, chilling in its resolve, "I'm sure. I've been waiting for this for too long." The kiss that followed was brief, almost fleeting, but unmistakable in its intimacy. She was the one who initiated it, leaning toward him without a moment's hesitation, her body language radiating a hunger that pierced me to my core. My stomach churned with a sickening lurch as I watched them pull away, their faces, even in the grainy resolution, lit with a disturbing mix of determination and a lingering shadow of guilt. They drove off together, the camera tracking their route, a red line on my map, heading directly toward a luxurious hotel across town. I didn't need to follow them, I already knew precisely where they were going, and what would happen next in room 213. But I wasn't done yet. Earlier that day, with Victor's cunning assistance, I had arranged for a hidden recording device to be placed in room 213, tucked neatly into the base of a decorative lamp. If there were any lingering, desperate doubts about Camilla's intentions, about the true nature of their relationship, this would settle them once and for all. Hours later, sitting alone in the quiet, suffocating silence of my garage, my phone connected to the recording device, I listened. Their voices were crystal clear, every word, every murmur, every gasp cutting deeper than the last, slicing through my last defenses. I heard Caleb's voice, smooth and seductive. "Why did it take you so long to agree to this, Camilla? To finally come to me?" And then, Camilla's reply, the words that shattered what little remained of my heart, spoken with a chilling casualness, "Alexander doesn't see me anymore. I'm just, there. Part of his routine. But with you, Caleb, I feel alive. Seen." Caleb's low chuckle, almost a purr, "You could have just left him, darling. Walked away." And her final, devastating sentence, delivered without a hint of remorse, as if discussing the weather, "It's not that simple. I don't want to hurt him. This is easier." That final sentence. "This is easier." As though systematically betraying me, meticulously lying to me, and dragging our marriage through the mud of her infidelity was merely a matter of convenience, a path of least resistance. Something inside me, something deep and essential, irrevocably broke. I ended the recording, my hand trembling, and stared blankly at the screen in silence, the final, brutal words echoing in the cavern of my mind. I had everything I needed, undeniable, damning proof of her lies, her calculated actions, and her cold, deliberate choices. There was no longer any room for doubt, no sliver of hope to cling to. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, the future I had envisioned, it was all a monstrous, intricate lie, a carefully constructed facade that had finally, spectacularly, crumbled into dust. That night, I couldn't look at Camilla the same way. Every word she spoke, every casual remark, felt hollow, a performance. Every smile, once a source of warmth and comfort, was now a grotesque mask, hiding a truth so ugly it made my stomach churn. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. If I was going to do this, if I was going to expose her, I was going to do it on my terms, with devastating precision, leaving her absolutely nowhere to hide. The cracks in our marriage had widened into a chasm, an unbridgeable abyss, and soon, everything would collapse. But when it did, it would be on my timeline. I wasn't going to lash out, to lose control, to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I was going to expose her lies with such undeniable force, with such meticulous detail, leaving no room for excuses, no possibility of escape. And believe me, when the time came, when I pulled back the final curtain on her deception, she wouldn't see it coming. If I was going to confront her, it needed to be methodical, undeniable, and utterly inescapable. The opportunity, a twisted gift from fate, presented itself on a silver platter. "We're hosting a small corporate party this Friday," she announced over dinner one evening, her voice light, an artificial cheerfulness that grated on my raw nerves. "Just a few colleagues, nothing too elaborate. Can you help me set up, darling?" Her request came with a smile, the kind of charming, effortless smile that might have softened me, melted my defenses in the past. But now, it felt rehearsed, calculated, a practiced performance for a soon-to-be-shattered audience. I forced myself to smile back, a brittle, strained expression. "Of course, Camilla. Whatever you need." Inside, a cold, hard anger solidified. I couldn't believe the sheer audacity, the brazenness of it. She was bringing Caleb Thorne, her lover, her co-conspirator, into my home, into our home, the very sanctuary she had desecrated with her lies. If she thought this party would be her safe haven, a stage for her continued deception, she was gravely mistaken. This wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be an unveiling. A public execution of her deceit. The day of the party, I moved through the house quietly, deliberately, my movements precise, controlled. I made sure everything was ready, not for her unsuspecting guests, but for my meticulously planned act of exposure. I transferred all the damning evidence, the text messages, the audio recordings, the video footage from the car and the hotel room, to a secure, encrypted flash drive. Then, with expert hands, I configured the large living room smart TV to display the contents of the drive with the single press of a button, overriding any other input. I didn't want a chaotic screaming match, a messy public brawl, or a tearful, manipulative scene. I wanted the cold, hard truth to speak for itself, undeniably, unadorned. By the time the first guests began to arrive, the house was buzzing with a superficial veneer of laughter, the polite clinking of glasses, and the low hum of innocuous conversation. Camilla floated through the room, a dazzling hostess, charming everyone with her effortless smile and seemingly boundless grace. She looked radiant, vibrant, like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, a ghostly echo of the past. But now, I saw it for what it truly was, a masterful, calculated performance, a grand illusion. Then, I saw him. Caleb Thorne. He was standing near the drinks table, exuding an irritating aura of casual confidence, chatting easily with a group of Camilla's coworkers. His smile, usually so composed, now struck me as annoyingly smug, a triumphant smirk. My fists clenched involuntarily at my sides, my knuckles white, but I forced myself to remain calm, to maintain the facade of the dutiful, welcoming host. I watched, my gaze unwavering, as Camilla, ever the gracious hostess, drifted toward him, her demeanor subtly shifting from professional to something more intimate, more charged. She leaned in close, her hand brushing his arm with a lingering, almost possessive touch, as she whispered something in his ear. He laughed softly, a low, familiar sound that grated against my raw nerves, confirming the sickening intimacy between them. It was time. I stepped into the center of the spacious living room, directly in front of the large, strategically placed TV screen. I picked up a delicate crystal wine glass and clinked it gently with a spoon, the soft chime cutting through the polite din of conversation. The room fell silent almost instantly, all eyes, curious and expectant, turning toward me. Camilla's gaze lingered on me, her expression a mix of curiosity and calm anticipation, utterly oblivious to the storm about to break. Caleb's smug smile, however, faltered ever so slightly, a fleeting flicker of unease in his eyes. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steady, remarkably calm, echoing with an unnerving resonance in the sudden silence. Camilla told me this would be a night to remember, a truly special occasion. And she was absolutely right. I paused, allowing my words to hang in the air, creating a dramatic, almost theatrical suspense. I'd like to share something with you all. A little insight into the kind of connections we've built here tonight. A testament, if you will, to modern relationships. I picked up the remote control, my finger hovering over the play button, and pressed it. The large living room TV screen sprang to life, bathing the stunned faces of the guests in its cold, blue glow. It immediately displayed a series of damning screenshots, the intimate text messages between Camilla and Caleb, detailing their secret rendezvous, their illicit plans, their shared desires. The room was so quiet in that moment, the silence so profound, that I could literally hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a stark contrast to the deafening roar in my ears. The messages, stark and undeniable, were a brutal, unfiltered chronicle of deception and profound betrayal. Gasps rippled through the stunned crowd, a wave of collective shock. I turned my head, my gaze sweeping across the faces of my friends, their expressions shifting from polite curiosity to abject horror. Camilla was frozen in place, her face drained of all color, a ghostly white, her eyes wide with shock and dawning terror. Caleb, on the other hand, was already trying to subtly, discreetly, edge toward the nearest exit, attempting to melt into the shadows. "I'm not done," I said, my voice sharp, cutting through the stunned silence like a freshly honed blade. "Let's move on to the next part, shall we?" The screen shifted, transitioning seamlessly from the text messages to the high-definition footage from the dashboard camera in Camilla's car. The image was grainy, but undeniably clear, their clandestine kiss, brief but passionate, captured in vivid detail. Then, their hushed conversation about the hotel, the specific room number, the casual, almost predatory planning. The audience's shock deepened, turning to murmurs, then to horrified whispers, their collective outrage building like a storm. Finally, with a deliberate, slow movement, I played the audio recording from the hidden device in room 213. The voices, Camilla's and Caleb's, were crystal clear, every word, every nuance, every intimate sigh, cutting deeper than the last, echoing through the stunned silence of my living room. Caleb's voice, confident, almost gloating, "Why did it take you so long to agree to this, Camilla? To finally come to me?" Camilla's reply, the words that would haunt my dreams for years, "Alexander doesn't see me anymore. I'm just, there. Part of his routine. But with you, Caleb, I feel alive. Seen." Caleb's low, purring chuckle, "You could have just left him, darling. Walked away cleanly." And then, her final, devastating sentence, delivered with a chilling casualness that broke something fundamental inside me, "It's not that simple. I don't want to hurt him. This is easier. This is easier," I repeated, my voice shaking now, the carefully constructed calm finally fracturing. "Easier than being honest. Easier than respecting the man who built a life with you. Easier than admitting your desires." The recording ended, leaving a profound, echoing silence in its wake, punctuated only by the shallow, ragged breaths of the stunned guests. Camilla, her face a mask of abject horror, let out a choked gasp, her eyes wide and overflowing with tears, as if she had just seen a ghost, or rather, the stark, brutal truth of herself laid bare. Caleb, abandoning all pretense of subtlety, made a sudden, desperate lunge for the front door. But Ethan, ever vigilant, ever protective, was already there, blocking his escape, a silent, unmoving sentinel. "You're not going anywhere, Thorne," Ethan said, his voice low, menacing. "Not until Alexander is finished." Caleb, cornered, his face contorted in a mixture of fear and rage, turned on me. "You sick bastard. You recorded us. You set this up." "Every single word," I said, my voice regaining its steel, my eyes locked on his. "Every single, treacherous word. You, Caleb, preyed on my wife. And you, Camilla," I turned my gaze to her, her body trembling uncontrollably, "You chose to betray me. In my own home. In front of my friends. With him." Camilla, driven by a sudden, frantic desperation, perhaps attempting to salvage some shred of dignity, or simply lashing out in her utter humiliation, lurched forward. Her hand swung, a blur of motion, connecting with my face with a sharp, stinging slap. The sound echoed in the silent room, a sharp crack. It wasn't just a physical blow, it was a final, desperate act of public humiliation, a final attempt to assert control in a situation where she had none. A primal roar tore from my throat, a deep, guttural sound born of weeks of suppressed pain, humiliation, and betrayal. The carefully constructed facade of my composure shattered completely. All the calculated restraint, all the methodical planning, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a searing, blinding rage. Before I could even register the thought, my right hand, balled into a fist hardened by years of working with tools, lashed out instinctively, a raw, uncontrolled explosion of fury. My knuckles connected with bone, a sickening crack that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the house. Caleb Thorne staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and pain, his hand flying to his mouth. When he pulled it away, a single, blood-stained tooth, a stark white fragment of his smug grin, lay on the polished oak floor, a grim trophy of my shattered rage. A collective gasp swept through the room. Chaos erupted. Sarah rushed to Camilla's side, while David and Noah stepped forward, positioning themselves protectively around me, their faces grim, ready for whatever came next. Caleb, spitting blood, his face a mask of shock and fury, scrambled to regain his footing. But the fight had left him. The sight of his own blood, the missing tooth, seemed to break his spirit. He backed away, clutching his jaw, his eyes darting frantically toward the door, seeking only escape. "Get out," I snarled, my voice raw, laced with venom, my chest heaving. "Both of you. Get out of my house. Now." Camilla, sobbing uncontrollably, her face streaked with tears and a fresh stain of humiliation, was half dragged, half stumbled toward the front door by Sarah. Caleb, a broken, bleeding man, followed, his bravado utterly evaporated. The front door slammed shut behind them, leaving an echoing, deafening silence. The party was over. The guests, horrified witnesses to the brutal unraveling of a marriage, slowly, awkwardly, began to disperse, offering mumbled apologies and sympathetic glances. When they were all gone, the house felt colder, emptier than ever before, despite the lingering scent of spilled wine and shattered dreams. I stood in the middle of the room, my hand throbbing, my heart aching, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been my life. The truth was out. And it was far more devastating than I could have ever imagined.